To our top story, the growing concerns about more people rushing to Kabul airport after it's claimed UK evacuations could end within hours. The Guardian newspaper is reporting British troops could leave Afghanistan in the next day or so, ahead of America's deadline on Tuesday. The Foreign Secretary is insisting that Britain will use all remaining time to get people out. Let's get a view. Joining me live on LBC News this lunchtime is Chris Nineham, Vice Chair, Stop the War Coalition. Good afternoon.
Hi, Jim.
What do you make of what you've been witnessing and hearing and seeing in the last couple of days?
Well, it's a horrible situation for people who are desperate to get out of the country. There's no question about that, and this will only make it even more unbearable. I mean, you know, the problem is that the Taliban have won a war here, and the whole problem stems from the wrong decision of the US and Britain and the rest of the Western alliance at the time to go in and to think that by invading the country, by bombing it, by drone attacks, that they could somehow deliver progress in humanitarian, humanitarian outcomes. Obviously, when you invade an occupied country, it creates, apart from massive levels of death and destruction, it creates a huge amount of bitterness and anger against you. I mean, any child should know that. So really what we're seeing is the terrible consequences of an absolutely disastrous decision made 20 years ago that we campaigned against and protested against and argued against at the time.
So when is the right time? If you have invaded at some point, you've got to withdraw. Is there a right time to exit?
Earlier the better. It would have been good if we exited a year ago, 10 years ago. The best thing would not have been would have been not to invade in the first place. You know, I mean, this isn't just a question of the historical record. The problem is, we had Tony Blair coming out 3 or 4 days ago trying to sort of defend the whole notion of humanitarian interventionism for the future. And we really have to, at this stage, in the face of this kind of catastrophe, we have to learn some lessons. We cannot go on sending our troops into deadly situations in the kind of delusion that somehow by bombing a country, by invading it, by sending drones, that we can deliver progress. This idea has to be killed off now, so that we tack to a new kind of foreign policy that doesn't cause this kind of devastation.
Are you fearful of what will happen once the Taliban are able to carry out or get up to whatever they decide? And is there a risk of future reprisals seen on Western soil?
Well, I'm very worried, obviously. I mean, it's a horrible, desperate situation, not helped actually by the fact that our Home Secretary is limiting the number of refugees that are going to be allowed into this country to 5,000, which I think is an absolute scandal, given the responsibility that Britain has for the death and destruction over the last 20 years. We should be saying to any Afghan who can or wants to come into our country that we welcome you and we will look after you, because, we've been absolutely central, not just part of. We've been one of the 2 countries in the world that has been most responsible for this carnage. So, yeah, I'm very, very worried. I mean, and we need to take those kind of steps. But we need to understand that in the end of the day, the solution for the people of Afghanistan has to come from them. I mean, it's a harsh thing to say, but it's the democratic truth. You cannot kind of export progress through the barrel of a gun.
And finally, how do you think the people from Afghanistan, what kind of music, what kind of thoughts will they have towards the West after the legacy that is left 20 years later?
I mean, that's the terrible thing, and it's the thing that, obviously, that someone should have recognised back in the day. It is obvious that if you kill 240,000 people is the best guess of the number of Afghans directly killed by our occupation. I mean, that's a huge number, and all the people who've been displaced, all the damage that's been done to the infrastructure and to the basic kind of necessities that people need to live. I mean, this is a very, very bad, toxic legacy. So, yeah, there will be a huge amount of anger. And One of the things that we need to say about Tony Blair's war on terror, by the way, is that it is undeniably and undoubtedly made the world a much, much more dangerous place. There is so much more terrorism around the world now than there was in 2001. Because, you know, in the end of the day, terrible though it is, terrorism is a kind of response partly to the actions that you take.
Thank you very much for sharing your views live. Chris Nineham, Vice Chair of the Stop the War Coalition.